Good morning. Good morning. And it's good to see you all here today. So in recent weeks, we've been discussing the Diamond Sutra, the Vajra Chedika Paramita Sutra, the Diamond Cutting Sutra, the sutra that cuts through delusions and leads to complete, perfect wisdom. So today, we'll be picking up on a section that discusses the nature of the teachings themselves. It's a relatively short section, so I'll just read the whole section first, and then we'll go through it bit by bit. Throughout the Diamond Sutra, it's a conversation between Subhuti and the Buddha. And interestingly, in this conversation, the Buddha is the questioner, and Subhuti is supposed to respond, and then the Buddha responds to those or comments on those responses. Subhuti said to the Buddha, "World honored one, in times to come, will there be beings who, when they hear these teachings, have real faith and confidence in them?" The Buddha said, "Subhuti, do not utter such words. 500 years after the passing of the Tathagata, there will be beings who, having practiced rules of morality and being thus possessed of merit, happen to hear of these statements and will understand their truth. Such beings, you should know, have planted their roots of merit not only under one, two, three, or four, or five Buddhas, but under countless Buddhas. When such beings, upon hearing these statements, arouse even one moment of pure and clear confidence, the Tathagata will see them and recognize their immeasurable merit. Why? Because all these beings are free from the idea of self, a person, a being, or a living soul. They are free from the idea of a dharma as well as a no dharma. Why? Because if they cherish the idea of a dharma, they are still attached to a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. If they cherish the idea of a no dharma, they are attached to a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. Therefore, do not cherish the idea of a dharma, nor that of a no dharma. For this reason, the Tathagata always preaches thus: O you bhikkhus, you monks, know that my teaching is to be likened unto a raft. Even a dharma is cast aside, much more a no dharma. Well, that section can seem quite confusing, but we'll go through it a little bit at a time and try to put it into some context for better understanding. The Diamond Sutra has been the source for many, many commentaries and many interpretations, all of which are of some value. And it should not be concluded that any single commentary, including this one, um, fully explains the meaning of the sutra. The sutra stands by itself in a way, but I hope to shed a little light on this passage today. So Subhuti has this question of whether beings in the future will be able to benefit from these teachings, whether they will have any confidence in them. And the Buddha mildly rebukes Subhuti, saying, "Do not utter such words. 500 years after the passing of the Tathagata, there will be beings who, having practiced rules of morality, and being thus possessed of merit, happen to hear of these statements and will understand their truth." Now, this notion about 500 years after the death of the Buddha is brings up a recurring story that appears both in early Buddhist teachings and also in the Mahayana literature. And this story is that after the Buddha's teaching, there are various epochs of understanding. And during the first 500 years after the Buddha's death, there will be full understanding of the Buddha's teachings and full wisdom. And during the next 500 years or so, there'll be just really the trappings of understanding. There'll be the rituals, but there won't be any deep understanding of these teachings. And then the following 500 years, there will be a lack of teachings altogether, and there will be no understanding of these offerings that the Buddha made. And so this was widely believed. And in fact, uh, during the time of Eihei Dogen, who was the founding teacher of the Soto Zen tradition that we base our practice on here, it was widely thought that they were living in the time of Mappo, Mappo being the Japanese word for this third epoch when the Buddha, a decadent or an epoch of decay of the Buddha's teachings. And many, were pessimistic about all of this. Dogen spoke out vehemently that it was still possible, even in a time of Mappo, to have full understanding and achieve awakening. And he emphasized Zazen as a method, as a way into full understanding. So such beings, those who are open to the Buddha's teachings in the future, shall have planted their roots of merit, not only under one Buddha or two or three or four. In other words, they will have, for an extended period of time, prepared the way for deeper understanding of the Buddha's teachings by practicing morality, meditation, and the cultivation of wisdom. Uh, Bringing up the phrase, those with little dust in their eyes will understand. When beings, upon hearing these statements, arouse even one moment of pure and clear confidence, the Tathagata will see them and recognize their immeasurable merit. When hearing these statements, they arouse one moment of pure and clear confidence or faith, faith in the teachings. Faith can be a fraught word because it's used in various ways. It's oftentimes equated by skeptics as blind faith, believing in something just because someone tells you it's true or because you feel like you ought to believe it. Blind faith. That's not the kind of faith that is talked about in the Buddhist context. When you think about it, any kind of learning, cultivation, advancement, progress um, involves some measure of faith. For instance, if you go for your first piano lesson, you have to have faith that you will, at some point, be able to play this rather difficult instrument. You have to have faith that the teacher will give you adequate guidance to achieve that result. That is the kind of faith that we're discussing here, the kind of confidence. And over time, that faith, that confidence can be supported by experience that confirms the validity of that confidence. The Tathagata will see them and recognize a measurable merit. Now, we're talking about 500 years after the Buddha's death. So, how can the Buddha see them and recognize their merit? This goes to the notion that was widely expanded in the Mahayana literature of a transcendent Buddha spirit, a transcendent Buddha that was all pervasive over time and space. The notion that the Buddha's physical death does not eliminate the opportunity to have intimacy with the Buddha through his teachings and his successive ancestors, teachers. That you can, in fact, have a relationship with this person who is no longer alive on the planet. So why does the Buddha recognize a measurable merit? Why? Because all these beings are free of the idea of a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. This series of four has been already discussed in previous talks because it appears recurrently throughout the sutra. The idea of a self, something permanent, fixed, solid, a person, a personality, a social being, a being, something that passes through time and is separate from other beings and separate from everything else. A living soul, something that is eternally present and stable, fixed. So part of the message of the sutra is to dispel this notion of a fixed, separate self, not to deny any kind of selfhood, but to understand it as something fluid. The self as a verb and not a noun. And then he goes on to say they're free from the idea of a dharma as well as a no dharma. Now, dharma is a word that is used variably in Buddhist literature. It most often refers to the Buddha's teachings, the dharma, but it can also be a word that describes reality itself, things as they are, the truth, the law. It can also be used to just describe objects of the senses, the tree, the bush, uh, you know, the cushion on the floor, whatever. Um, just objects of the senses or ideas. Ideas are described as dharmas. They're objects of the mind. But he says they are free from the idea of a dharma and of a no dharma. As we'll see, I think at the end of this passage, the Buddha here is referring to his teachings, to the text, to his teachings, as well as a no dharma, the absolute absence of teachings, the absolute absence of any kind of direction. Why? Because they cherish the idea, because if they cherish the idea of a dharma, they are still attached to a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. If they cherish the idea of a no dharma, they are attached to a self, a person, a being, or a living soul. So again, I think the Buddha is encouraging us not to take a possessive view of either the self or of the teachings, to not become caught up in the language, not to become caught up in these teachings, which the Buddha viewed as a skillful means and not as a sacred text. The Buddhism is different from many religious traditions in that there is no scripture or sacred text. There's a lot of literature, but it's not considered a text that is revealed divinely. It's viewed as something more like an assistive device, like a walker that you might use to get from one place to another if you are having problems with your joints or with your legs. And once you get to where you're going with the walker, you don't need to put it in your lap. You don't need to tuck it into bed with you at night. It's to help you get from one place to another. And that is how the text, the teachings, the sutras are viewed. Oh, And the Buddha goes on and says, for this reason, the Tathagata, the Buddha, he refers to himself in the third person frequently, also preaches thus, O you bhikkhus, you bhikkhus rather, you monks, know that my teaching is to be likened onto a raft. Even a dharma is cast aside, much more a no dharma. Even a dharma, the teachings are cast aside, even more no teachings, or kind of a nihilistic approach. So this analogy of the raft appears again multiple times in Buddhist literature, in the early Buddha's suttas, as well as later in the Mahayana tradition. And it has to do with a early Buddhist, early sutta that describes the teachings as a raft. So if you're approaching a stream that's too deep to walk across, you might notice that there is a raft on the shore and think, well, I can use this raft to get across the stream. And once you have done so, and you arrived at the other shore of the stream, what do you do with the raft? The Buddha recommends that you leave it on the other shore. Other people can use it. He advises against thinking, the kind of thinking is, oh, this raft has been very helpful to me. I think I will carry it with me wherever I go. And leaving the valley with the stream, starting up the mountain, carrying the raft on your back. It's just a burden at that point. It's no longer helpful. And the Buddha encourages his teachings to be viewed in the same way. Once you have used them, then you set them aside and go on your way freely, unburdened. Why was the Buddha particular about that? I think the Buddha realized that many times teachings can be turned into an ideology, can be turned into something rigid that constrains people rather than freeing them. The Buddha realized that ideologies can lead to conflict with contrary ideologies. And conflict can lead to wars and bloodshed. So the Buddha advises us to hold these teachings lightly, to use them. But then once we've used them, to set them aside. One might ask, well, if there is no scripture, where are your moorings? If there's nothing just solid that you can rely on and that you can put on a page and refer to again and again and again, what are the moorings for people practicing Buddhism? And I think we get a sense of that from another sutra that we've studied, the Heart Sutra. And in the Heart Sutra, it says, all Buddhas of past, present, and future rely on prajna paramita. And thereby achieve unsurpassed perfect awakening. Relying on prajna paramita, complete perfect wisdom. And what is complete perfect wisdom? Complete perfect wisdom is wisdom that is infused with compassion. Likened to the two wings of a bird, an analogy you probably have heard before, where a bird can only fly if it has two wings, the wing of wisdom and the wing of compassion. There's another element that is necessary, though, for flight, and that is air, atmosphere, because wings can't achieve any lift unless there is air. And the air in this case is awareness, all pervading awareness, through which the bird of wisdom and compassion can take flight. So I think we'll stop there and we'll pick up where we left off next week. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate your attention.